Hey there, friends. Before we dive into this incredible story that'll leave you speechless, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who loves a good mystery, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from all around the world. Now let me take you back to 1835, Natchez, Mississippi, where silence held more power than any scream. My name is Elior, and I'm 17 years old. Most folks around here think I'm mute. Been that way since the day I was born, or so they believe. Truth is, I ain't never had a reason to speak. Not until that night when everything changed, when the words I'd been holding inside for all these years finally broke free and shattered three of the most powerful families in all of Mississippi. See, when you don't talk, people forget you're there. They forget you got ears. They forget you got a mind that works just fine. And most importantly, they forget you got eyes that see everything. Everything. I was born into slavery on the Whitmore plantation, right here in Natchez. My mama, she died bringing me into this world, and my daddy, well, nobody ever told me who he was. Might have been Master Whitmore himself, might have been one of his sons, or might have been another slave. Don't matter much now, I suppose. What matters is that from the moment I drew my first breath, I was property that couldn't speak. The Whitmore plantation sits on a hill overlooking the Mississippi River, with its grand white columns and sprawling cotton fields that stretch as far as the eye can see. But it ain't the only big house round these parts. No, sir, there's three families that run this town like they own the very air we breathe. The Whitmores, the Beauregards, and the Ashfords. Each family got their own plantation, their own secrets, and their own reasons to hate the others. Master Whitmore, he's a tall, thin man with grey hair and cold blue eyes that seem to look right through you. His wife, Mrs. Whitmore, she's got a nervous disposition and hands that shake when she thinks nobody's watching. They got two sons, Charles, who's about 25 and mean as a rattlesnake, and William, who's younger and tries to act like he's got a conscience, though I seen him do things that'd make the devil himself blush. The Beauregards live about 5 miles east, in a house that's even grander than the Whitmores. Master Beauregard's got a voice like thunder and a temper to match. He's got one daughter, Miss Catherine, who's beautiful as a magnolia blossom but with thorns sharper than any rose. She's engaged to Charles Whitmore, though I seen the way she looks at other men when she thinks nobody's watching. Then there's the Ashfords, living south of town in a house that's older than the others but just as impressive. Master Ashford's got silver hair and a limp from some old war wound. His wife died years back, leaving him with twin sons, Marcus and Matthew, who are both around my age. They look identical, but their souls are as different as night and day. Now you might wonder how a slave boy like me knows so much about these families. Well, that's the thing about being the mute boy. They use me for everything. I serve at their dinner parties, I tend their horses, I clean their houses, and I stand in corners while they conduct their business. They talk around me like I'm a piece of furniture, sharing secrets they'd never dare whisper to another soul. I learned early on that silence was my greatest weapon. While other slaves got whipped for speaking out of turn, I got ignored. While others got sold off for knowing too much, I got kept around because they figured a mute boy couldn't tell nobody nothing. They was wrong about that, but they wouldn't find out until it was too late. The thing is, I wasn't always planning to stay silent forever. There was times when I wanted to speak up, times when I seen things that made my blood boil and my heart ache. Like when I watched Charles Whitmore beat a slave girl half to death just because she looked at him wrong, or when I seen Master Beauregard sell a woman's children right out from under her, splitting up a family like they was nothing more than livestock. But I held my tongue because I was waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right audience. See, I'd been collecting secrets like other folks collect coins. Every whispered conversation, every hidden meeting, every lie told in the dark, I remembered it all. And I knew that someday, somehow, I'd find a way to use what I knew. The three families, They pretended to be friends in public, attending each other's parties and conducting business together. But underneath all that southern charm and hospitality, there was hatred so thick you could cut it with a knife. The Whitmores thought the Beauregards was beneath them. The Beauregards thought the Ashfords was too old-fashioned, and the Ashfords thought both the other families was nothing but nouveau riche upstarts. They'd been feuding for years over land disputes, business deals gone wrong, and slights both real and imagined. But there was something deeper, something darker that connected all three families. Something that went back further than any of them wanted to remember. I'd been piecing it together for years, listening to fragments of conversations, watching the way certain names made people go quiet, noticing how certain topics got changed real quick when the wrong person walked into a room. There was a secret buried so deep that it had roots in all three families, and I was the only one who knew the whole truth. That's why, when the storm came that October night, when all three families gathered under one roof for what they thought would be a simple business meeting, I finally decided it was time to speak. Time to let the words I'd been holding inside for 17 years finally see the light. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you about that night, the night that changed everything, you need to understand just how deep these secrets ran and how many lives they'd already destroyed. Because what I said that night wasn't just words, it was justice, served cold after years of waiting. And once those words left my lips, there was no taking them back. The summer of 1835 was hotter than usual, with the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and drives folks to madness. That's when the first crack in the family's perfect facades started to show, and I was there to see it all. It started with a letter that arrived at the Whitmore plantation on a Tuesday morning in July. I was polishing silver in the dining room when Master Whitmore opened it, and I watched his face go white as fresh cotton. His hands started shaking so bad he had to set his coffee cup down before he dropped it. "Charles!" he called out, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "Charles, get in here now." When Charles came running, Master Whitmore handed him the letter without a word. I watched Charles read it, watched his jaw clench and his eyes narrow into slits. Whatever was in that letter, it wasn't good news. "Who sent this?" Charles asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No signature," Master Whitmore replied. "But look at the handwriting. Look at the paper. This ain't from no common person." Charles crumpled the letter in his fist, but not before I caught a glimpse of a few words. The truth about what happened to Sarah. And 20 years is long enough. Sarah. That was a name I'd heard whispered before, always followed by quick glances and changed subjects. Sarah was the ghost that haunted all three families, though none of them would admit it. That same week, I was sent to the Beauregard plantation to deliver some papers. While I was waiting in their parlor, I overheard Miss Catherine arguing with her father about something. Her voice was high and strained, not like her usual sweet Southern belle tone. "Daddy, you can't keep pretending this ain't happening," she was saying. "The questions, the looks people are giving us, something's got to be done." "Catherine, you hush your mouth about things you don't understand," Master Beauregard snapped back. "Some stones are better left unturned. But what if someone already turned them? What if someone knows?" There was a long silence. Then Master Beauregard's voice, quieter now, but somehow more frightening. "Then God help us all." I filed that conversation away with all the others, another piece of the puzzle I'd been putting together for years. See, I'd learned that Sarah wasn't just any girl who'd disappeared. She'd been the daughter of a freed slave who'd worked for all three families at different times. A girl who'd been beautiful, smart, and according to the whispers I'd heard, involved with someone she shouldn't have been. The Ashford twins, Marcus and Matthew, they was the key to understanding what really happened to Sarah. I'd been watching them for years, and I could see the guilt eating away at them like a cancer. Marcus, the older twin by 10 minutes, carried himself like a man with a weight on his shoulders. Matthew had the look of someone who'd seen things that haunted his dreams. One evening in late August, I was tending the horses at the Ashford stable when I overheard the twins talking. They didn't know I was there. I'd gotten real good at being invisible over the years. "We should have told the truth from the beginning," Matthew was saying, his voice shaky. "All these years of lying, all these years of pretending, it's killing me, Marcus." "You think it's been easy for me?" Marcus shot back. "You think I don't see her face every time I close my eyes? But telling the truth now won't bring her back. It'll just destroy everything we got left." "Maybe we deserve to have it all destroyed," Matthew whispered. Marcus grabbed his brother by the shoulders, shaking him hard. "Don't you ever say that again. We was just boys, Matthew, just scared boys who made a terrible mistake." "We wasn't the only ones involved," Matthew said. "The others, they're just as guilty as we are. Maybe more so." "The others got more to lose than we do," Marcus replied. "And that makes them dangerous. You remember what happened to old Samuel when he started asking too many questions about Sarah?" Samuel. Another name I'd heard whispered in dark corners. He'd been a slave who'd worked for the Beauregards, and according to the stories, he'd been found dead in the river about 15 years ago. Officially, it was ruled an accident. But I'd heard enough whispers to know that Samuel had been asking questions about Sarah's disappearance, and then suddenly he wasn't asking questions about nothing no more. As the summer wore on, I noticed changes in all three families. Master Whitmore started drinking more, often sitting on his porch late into the night, staring out at the river like he was expecting something to rise up from its depths. Mrs. Whitmore's nervous condition got worse, and she started jumping at every little sound. Charles Whitmore became even meaner than usual, taking out his frustrations on the slaves with a cruelty that was shocking even by his standards. I watched him whip a young boy nearly to death just for spilling water on his boots. The rage in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was fear, pure and simple. Miss Catherine started acting strange too. She'd always been vain and self-centered, but now she seemed distracted, constantly looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to sneak up on her. Her engagement to Charles was supposed to be announced officially in the fall, but I noticed she'd stopped wearing the ring he'd given her. The Ashford twins grew more distant from each other as the weeks passed. Marcus threw himself into managing the plantation with an intensity that bordered on obsession, while Matthew started disappearing for hours at a time, riding off into the countryside without telling nobody where he was going. But it was Master Beauregard who showed the most dramatic change. The man who'd always been loud and commanding became quiet and watchful. He started carrying a pistol everywhere he went, and I noticed he'd hired extra men to patrol his property at night. All these changes, all this fear and paranoia, it was building to something. I could feel it in the air like the pressure before a thunderstorm. And I knew that whatever was coming, it was connected to Sarah and what had happened to her all those years ago. I'd been patient for 17 years, watching and listening and learning. But as that hot summer turned into a cooler fall, I started to realize that my silence had given me something more valuable than I'd ever imagined. The complete truth about what had happened to Sarah, and the power to destroy the people who'd killed her. Because that's what it was, murder. Not an accident, not a disappearance, but cold-blooded murder committed by people who thought their money and status would protect them forever. They was wrong about that, just like they was wrong about me being mute, and soon, very soon, they was going to find out just how wrong they'd been. October 15th, 1835. That's a date I'll never forget as long as I live, because that's the night I finally broke my silence and watched three of the most powerful families in Mississippi crumble like old parchment in a fire. The storm had been building all day, with dark clouds rolling in from the west and the air getting so thick you could barely breathe. Master Whitmore had called a meeting at his plantation, something about settling a land dispute that had been going on between the three families for months. But I knew it wasn't really about land. It was about that letter he'd received back in July, and the fear that had been eating away at all of them ever since. By evening, the wind was howling something fierce, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Perfect weather for secrets to be revealed, I thought to myself, as I helped prepare the dining room for the meeting. They all arrived around 8 o'clock, despite the storm. Master and Mrs. Beauregard came with Miss Catherine, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The Ashford twins rode over with their father, and I could see the tension in their faces even from across the room. Master Whitmore had set up the meeting in his study, a dark, wood-panelled room lined with books that nobody ever read, and portraits of dead relatives who seemed to watch everything with disapproving eyes. I was stationed in the corner, supposedly there to serve drinks and tend the fire, but really there to be invisible while they conducted their business. Charles Whitmore was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his face flushed with anger and something else, fear, maybe, or guilt. William sat quietly in a chair by the window, but I could see his hands shaking as he tried to light his pipe. "Well," Master Whitmore said once everyone was settled, "I suppose you all know why we're here." "If this is about that damn letter," Master Beauregard started, but Whitmore cut him off with a wave of his hand. "It ain't just about the letter, and you know it," Whitmore said. "It's about what that letter represents. Someone out there knows our business, and they ain't planning to keep quiet about it much longer." Miss Catherine spoke up then, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Daddy, maybe we should just tell the truth. Maybe it's time to—" "Catherine!" Master Beauregard's voice cracked like a whip. "You hold your tongue, girl. There ain't nothing to tell." But Marcus Ashford laughed, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. "Nothing to tell? Is that what we're calling it now? Nothing to tell about Sarah Jenkins?" The room went dead silent at the mention of that name. Even the storm outside seemed to quiet down, like the whole world was holding its breath. "Marcus," his father warned, "you watch yourself." "Watch myself?" Marcus stood up, his face twisted with years of suppressed guilt. "I've been watching myself for 20 years, Daddy. Watching myself lie, watching myself pretend, watching myself become someone I don't even recognize anymore." Matthew reached out to grab his brother's arm, but Marcus shook him off. "No, Matthew. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of living with what we did." Charles Whitmore stepped forward, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt. "You better think real careful about what you're fixing to say, Marcus." "Or what?" Marcus shot back. "You'll kill me too, like you killed Sarah?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. I felt my heart start beating faster because finally, after all these years, someone was about to tell the truth. "That's enough!" Master Whitmore roared. "We agreed we'd never speak of this again." "We agreed to a lot of things," Marcus said, his voice getting louder. "We agreed to keep quiet. We agreed to protect each other. We agreed to live with the lie. But I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend that girl didn't exist, that she didn't matter, that what we did to her was anything less than murder." Miss Catherine started crying then, big tears rolling down her cheeks. "I never wanted any part of this," she sobbed. "I was just a child when it happened. I didn't understand." "You understood enough," Charles snarled. "You understood enough to keep your mouth shut for 20 years. "Because you threatened to kill me too," Catherine screamed. "Just like you threatened to kill anyone who tried to tell the truth." That's when Master Beauregard pulled out his own gun, pointing it straight at Marcus. "Boy, you better sit down and shut up right now, or so help me God." But Marcus wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed relieved to finally be telling the truth. "Go ahead and shoot me," he said. "At least then I won't have to live with what we did to that poor girl anymore." What we did." William Whitmore spoke up for the first time, his voice shaky but determined. "What we did was follow your lead, Marcus. You and Charles, you're the ones who came up with the plan." "The plan?" Matthew finally found his voice, standing up to face his twin brother. "You call rape and murder a plan?" The word rape hit the room like a lightning bolt. I saw Master Whitmore flinch, saw Mrs. Whitmore cover her mouth with her hands, saw the color drain from everyone's faces. "She was going to tell," Charles said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Sarah was going to tell everyone what happened at the harvest dance. She was going to ruin all of us." "So you killed her," Marcus said, the words coming out like a confession. "We all killed her. We held her down while he did what he did. And then, when she threatened to go to the authorities, we took her out to the old mill and—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew how the story ended. That's when I realized it was time to break the silence I'd maintained for 17 years. Time to speak the words that would bring justice for Sarah Jenkins and destroy the people who'd murdered her. I stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time in my life, I opened my mouth and spoke. "I know where you buried her." The effect was immediate and devastating. Every head in the room turned toward me, every face went white with shock and terror. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. Then Charles Whitmore raised his gun and pointed it straight at my heart. "You," he whispered, his voice filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "You've been listening this whole time. You've been watching, learning, remembering." I nodded, still standing perfectly still. "I know where you buried Sarah Jenkins. I know about the mill. I know about the shallow grave by the old oak tree, and I know that tomorrow morning I'm going to take the sheriff there and show him exactly where to dig." The room exploded into chaos. Master Beauregard started shouting, Miss Catherine started screaming, the Ashford twins started arguing with each other. But through it all I just stood there, finally free of the burden I'd been carrying for so long, because you see, I hadn't just been silent all these years. I'd been waiting for the right moment to speak the words that would bring down the people who thought they were untouchable. And now, finally, that moment had come. The silence that followed my words was broken by the sound of Charles Whitmore cocking his pistol. But before he could pull the trigger, lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white light, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that made me smile for the first time in years, pure, unadulterated terror. "You think killing me will solve your problems?" I asked, my voice steady despite the gun pointed at my chest. "You think I'm the only one who knows? You think I've been keeping this secret all to myself for 20 years? Master Whitmore stepped forward, his face pale as death. "What do you mean, boy?" "I mean I wrote it all down," I said, reaching slowly into my shirt pocket. Every gun in the room swung toward me, but I just pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Every conversation I overheard, every secret meeting, every detail about what you did to Sarah Jenkins. And I gave copies to people you can't touch, people you can't threaten, people who'll make sure the truth comes out, whether I'm alive or dead." It was a lie, of course. I hadn't written nothing down, hadn't told nobody nothing, but they didn't know that. And the fear in their eyes told me they believed every word. Marcus Ashford started laughing then, a sound that was half relief and half hysteria. "Don't you see?" he said to the others. "It's over. It's finally over. We can stop pretending, stop lying, stop living in fear." "Shut up, Marcus," his father hissed. "Just shut your mouth." But Marcus was past caring about his father's threats. "No, Daddy, I'm done shutting up. This boy, this brave, silent boy, he's giving us a chance to finally do the right thing. To finally tell the truth about what we did." "The truth?" Charles snarled, swinging his gun toward Marcus. "The truth is that you're all cowards. The truth is that Sarah Jenkins was nothing but a freed slave's daughter who got too big for her britches. The truth is that she deserved what she got." That's when Matthew Ashford snapped. With a roar of rage, he launched himself at Charles, tackling him to the ground. The gun went off, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. And suddenly the room was full of struggling bodies and shouting voices. I stayed where I was, watching the chaos unfold around me. This was what I'd been waiting for, not just the revelation of their crimes, but the complete destruction of their unity. They were turning on each other now, just like I'd known they would. Master Beauregard was trying to pull Matthew off of Charles, while Master Whitmore was shouting for order. Miss Catherine had collapsed into a chair, sobbing hysterically, while Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen by the door, her hands pressed to her mouth in horror. "Stop it!" Master Ashford finally roared, firing his own pistol into the air. "All of you, stop it right now!" The fighting ceased, but the damage was done. Charles had a bloody nose, Matthew had a split lip, and the careful facade of southern gentility that had held their conspiracy together for 20 years was shattered beyond repair. "Now listen to me, all of you," Master Ashford continued, his voice shaking with age and emotion. "We got a choice to make. We can keep fighting each other, or we can figure out how to deal with this situation." "Deal with it?" Marcus wiped blood from his mouth and glared at his father. "There's only one way to deal with it, Daddy. We tell the truth. We confess what we did and we face the consequences." "The consequences?" Master Whitmore laughed bitterly. "Boy, do you have any idea what the consequences would be? We'd all hang, every last one of us." "Maybe we should," Matthew said quietly. "Maybe that's what we deserve." "Speak for yourself," Charles spat, getting to his feet and retrieving his gun. "I ain't hanging for no slave girl, no matter what her daddy's status was." That's when I spoke again, my voice cutting through their arguments like a knife through butter. "Sarah Jenkins wasn't just any freed slave's daughter," I said. "She was pregnant." The room went dead silent again. I could hear the storm raging outside, could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, could hear the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. "Pregnant," I repeated, letting the words sink in. 3 months along when you killed her. "And the father—" I paused, looking directly at Charles Whitmore. "The father was you, Charles. That's why she was going to tell. Not just about the rape, but about the baby. Your baby." Charles's face went from pale to green. That's impossible. You never what?" I asked. "Never forced yourself on her at the harvest dance? Never threatened to kill her if she told anyone? Never realized that she was carrying your child when you and your friends decided to silence her forever?" Miss Catherine let out a wail of anguish. "Charles, you told me you loved me. You told me I was the only one." "Catherine, Charles started, but she cut him off. "You raped a girl and got her pregnant, and then you killed her to cover it up," she screamed. "And you expect me to marry you? You expect me to bear your children after what you did?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Charles said desperately. "It was just, she was so beautiful, and I'd been drinking, and you thought you could take whatever you wanted because you're white and she was black." I finished for him. "Just like you thought you could kill her because you're rich and she was poor." Master Beauregard had gone very quiet, staring at his daughter with something that might have been shame. "Catherine," he said finally, "you can't marry him now. You understand that, don't you?" "I wouldn't marry him if he was the last man on earth," Catherine spat. "I wouldn't marry him if my life depended on it." "Your life might depend on it," Master Whitmore said ominously. "All our lives might depend on keeping this family united." "United?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Look around you, old man. We ain't united. We're falling apart, just like we should have 20 years ago." 20 years ago we made a pact," Master Whitmore reminded them. "We swore we'd take this secret to our graves." "Well, maybe it's time we did," Matthew said quietly. "That's when I played my final card." "The sheriff's already on his way," I said, and this time it wasn't a lie. "I sent word to him before the meeting started, told him to come to the Whitmore plantation at midnight, said there was something important he needed to see." The clock in the corner began to chime, its deep tones echoing through the room. Midnight. As if summoned by my words, we could hear the sound of horses approaching through the storm, the jingle of harnesses and the splash of hooves in the mud. "No," Master Whitmore whispered. "No, this can't be happening." But it was happening. After 20 years of silence, after 20 years of lies and cover-ups and murdered witnesses, the truth was finally coming to light, and I was the one who'd brought it into the open. The sound of boots on the front porch echoed through the house, followed by a heavy knock on the door. "Sheriff Morrison," a voice called out. "Open up! I got word there was trouble here." Charles raised his gun one more time, pointing it at my head. "I should kill you right now," he snarled. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Kill me in front of the sheriff. See how that works out for you." His hand was shaking so bad he could barely hold the weapon steady. Behind him, I could see the others falling apart. Master Whitmore slumped in his chair like a broken man, Miss Catherine still sobbing, the Ashford twins holding onto each other like they were drowning. "Charles," Master Beauregard said quietly, "put the gun down, son. It's over." "It ain't over," Charles screamed. "It ain't over until I say it's over." But even as he spoke, I could hear the front door opening, could hear Sheriff Morrison's voice calling out as he entered the house. The sound of justice finally arriving after 20 long years of waiting. Charles looked around the room one last time, seeing the fear and guilt and shame in every face. Then, with a sound that was half sob and half snarl, he turned the gun on himself. "Charles, no!" Miss Catherine screamed, but it was too late. The gunshot echoed through the room like thunder, and Charles Whitmore crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath his head. And that's how Sheriff Morrison found us when he burst through the study door, standing around the body of a dead man, with the truth finally hanging in the air like smoke from his gun. Sheriff Morrison stood in the doorway, water dripping from his coat, his hand resting on his gun as he took in the scene before him. Charles Whitmore's body lay sprawled on the Persian rug, blood seeping into the expensive fabric, while the rest of us stood frozen like statues in a museum of guilt. "Jesus Christ," the sheriff breathed, stepping carefully into the room. "What in the hell happened here?" Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear. "Sheriff Morrison, my name is Elior. I'm the one who sent word for you to come. These people killed Sarah Jenkins 20 years ago, and Charles Whitmore just took his own life rather than face justice for what he did." The sheriff's eyes widened as he looked at me. You can talk?" "But everyone thought I was mute," I said. "I let them think that because it made them careless with their words around me. For 20 years, I've been listening, watching, learning the truth about what happened to Sarah Jenkins." Sheriff Morrison had known Sarah's father, Jacob Jenkins. Jacob had been a freed slave who'd worked as a blacksmith in town, a good man who'd raised his daughter to be proud and strong. When Sarah disappeared, Jacob had begged the sheriff to investigate, but the three families had closed ranks, claiming they knew nothing about what happened to her. "Sarah Jenkins," the sheriff repeated, his voice heavy with old regret. "Her daddy came to me, said she'd gone missing. I looked for her, but you didn't look hard enough," I said, not unkindly, "because these families told you she'd probably just run off, and you believed them because they were white and rich and respectable." The sheriff's face flushed with shame. I did what I could." "I know you did," I said, "but now you can do more. Now you can find her body and give her the burial she deserves." Master Whitmore finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sheriff, this boy, he's been listening to private conversations, making up stories." "Making up stories?" Marcus Ashford stepped forward, his face streaked with tears. "No, Sheriff, he ain't making up nothing. Every word he said is true. We killed Sarah Jenkins, and we've been living with that sin for 20 years. "Marcus, shut your mouth," his father hissed, but Marcus shook his head. "No, Daddy, I'm done shutting my mouth. I'm done living with this guilt." He turned to the sheriff, his voice growing stronger with each word. "We raped her, Sheriff. Charles Whitmore raped Sarah Jenkins at the harvest dance in 1815, and when she threatened to tell the authorities, we killed her to keep her quiet." Sheriff Morrison's hand moved to his gun again, but not in threat, in preparation. "Are you confessing to murder, son?" "I'm confessing to being part of it," Marcus said. "Me and my brother Matthew, we helped Charles and William Whitmore take Sarah out to the old mill by Coles Creek. We held her down while he finished what he'd started. And then we buried her body in a shallow grave by the old oak tree, about 100 yards south of the mill. Matthew was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. We were just boys, he managed to say between sobs. Scared boys who didn't know what else to do, but that don't excuse it. Nothing excuses what we did. Miss Catherine looked up from her chair, her face streaked with tears and mascara. I knew, she whispered. I was only 12, but I knew something terrible had happened. Charles told me if I ever said anything, he'd kill me too, and I believed him because I'd seen what he was capable of. Catherine, Master Beauregard warned, but she ignored him. No, Daddy. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of living with this secret. She turned to the sheriff, her voice growing stronger. Charles Whitmore was a monster, Sheriff. He raped that poor girl, got her pregnant, and then killed her to cover it up. And we all helped him do it by keeping quiet. Sheriff Morrison was writing everything down in a small notebook, his hand moving quickly across the page. Anyone else involved in this? Anyone else I need to know about? Samuel Washington, I said. He was a slave who worked for the Beauregards. About 15 years ago, he started asking questions about Sarah's disappearance. A week later, he was found dead in the river. That was an accident, Master Beauregard said quickly. Samuel couldn't swim. He fell in during a storm. Samuel could swim better than most white folks, I corrected. I seen him swimming in that river dozens of times. He didn't fall in, he was thrown in. Probably by Charles Whitmore, though I can't prove that now that Charles is dead. The sheriff looked around the room, taking in the faces of the most powerful families in Natchez. This is the biggest scandal this town has ever seen. If what you're saying is true, it's true. William Whitmore spoke up for the first time since his brother's suicide. His voice was shaky, but determined. Every word of it is true. Charles was my brother and I loved him, but he was evil, pure evil, and I've been carrying the guilt of what we did for 20 years. William, don't, his father pleaded. Think about the family name. Think about your mother. I am thinking about Mother, William said, glancing at Mrs. Whitmore, who stood pale and silent by the window. I'm thinking about how she's been living with a murderer for 20 years and never knew it. I'm thinking about how she deserves to know the truth about what kind of man her son really was. Mrs. Whitmore finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I knew, she whispered. Deep down, I always knew. The nightmares, the drinking, the way he looked at colored girls. I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to ask questions. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but inside the study, the emotional tempest was just reaching its peak. One by one, the members of the three families were confessing their parts in the cover-up, their voices mixing together in a chorus of guilt and shame and long-overdue honesty. Sheriff Morrison closed his notebook and looked at me. You said you know where the body is buried? I nodded. I followed them that night. I was only 7 years old, but I followed them to the mill and watched them bury her. I've been visiting her grave every year on the anniversary of her death, bringing flowers and saying prayers. She deserved better than to be forgotten. Why didn't you tell someone sooner? The sheriff asked. Who was I going to tell? I asked. I was a slave child who couldn't speak. Even if I could have talked, who would have believed me over them? But I knew that someday, somehow I'd find a way to get justice for Sarah. Tonight was that day. The sheriff nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Waiting for the right moment to make them confess. I've been waiting for them to destroy themselves, I corrected. All I did was give them the opportunity. The guilt was already eating them alive. I just helped it along. As the night wore on, Sheriff Morrison arrested everyone who'd been involved in Sarah's murder, or the subsequent cover-up. Master Whitmore, Master Beauregard, Master Ashford, the twins, William Whitmore, all of them were taken away in chains, their heads hanging in shame. Miss Catherine wasn't arrested since she'd been just a child when it happened, but her life was ruined just the same. No respectable family would associate with her now. No decent man would marry her. She'd spend the rest of her days as a social outcast, paying for her family's sins. As for me, I was finally free. Not just from slavery. Master Whitmore's arrest had effectively freed all his slaves, but free from the burden of carrying Sarah's secret, free from the weight of 20 years of silence. The next morning, I led Sheriff Morrison and a group of men to the old mill by Coles Creek. We found Sarah's remains exactly where I'd said they would be, buried in a shallow grave beneath the old oak tree. Her bones were wrapped in the remains of a blue dress, the same dress she'd been wearing the night she died. Jacob Jenkins had died 5 years earlier, never knowing what happened to his daughter, but we gave Sarah a proper burial in the town cemetery with a headstone that read, Sarah Jenkins, 1797-1815. Beloved daughter, justice delayed is not justice denied. The trials that followed were the biggest news Natchez had ever seen. Newspapers from as far away as New Orleans sent reporters to cover the story of the mute slave boy who'd brought down 3 of Mississippi's most powerful families. Marcus and Matthew Ashford were sentenced to life in prison. William Whitmore got 20 years. The older men, Master Whitmore, Master Beauregard, and Master Ashford, were all sentenced to hang, though Master Ashford died of a heart attack before his execution could be carried out. As for me, I used my newfound freedom to become something I'd never thought possible, a voice for the voiceless. I learned to read and write, and I spent the rest of my life working to help other slaves gain their freedom and find justice for the wrongs done to them. But I never forgot Sarah Jenkins, and I never forgot the lesson her death taught me, that silence can be a weapon, but only if you know when to break it. And when you do break it, you better make sure your words count. Because sometimes one voice speaking the truth can bring down an empire of lies. 3 months after the trials ended, I stood at Sarah's grave in the early morning light, watching the sun rise over the Mississippi River. The headstone was simple but dignified, carved from white marble that caught the golden rays and seemed to glow with its own inner light. I kept my promise, I whispered to the stone. Justice came slow, but it came. The town of Natchez had changed in the months since the truth came out. The 3 great plantations stood empty now, their fields growing wild, their grand houses slowly falling into decay. Some folks said the land was cursed, that the sins committed there had poisoned the very soil. Others said it was just the natural consequence of building wealth on the backs of murdered innocents. I'd been offered money for my story. Newspaper men from up north wanted to pay me handsomely to write down everything I'd seen and heard over the years, but I'd turned them all down. Sarah's story wasn't mine to sell, and the pain of those families wasn't entertainment for folks who'd never known what it was like to live in fear. Instead, I'd used my freedom to do something more important. With the help of some abolitionists who'd come down from Boston, I'd started a school for freed slaves and their children. We met in the old Beauregard carriage house, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to folks who'd never been allowed to learn such things. It wasn't easy work. There were plenty of white folks in town who didn't appreciate what we were doing, who thought that educating former slaves was dangerous and wrong. We'd had windows broken, threatening letters left on our door, and more than one midnight visit from men in white hoods who thought they could scare us into shutting down. But we kept going, because that's what Sarah would have wanted. She'd been educated, had known how to read and write and think for herself. That's part of what had made her dangerous to men like Charles Whitmore. She'd been smart enough to know her rights, brave enough to demand justice. The trials had revealed more than just the details of Sarah's murder. They'd exposed a whole network of violence and intimidation that the 3 families had used to maintain their power. Samuel Washington hadn't been the only person who'd died for asking too many questions. Over the years, there had been others, slaves who'd tried to run away, free blacks who'd gotten too uppity, white folks who'd spoken out against the system. All of it had been covered up, explained away as accidents or natural deaths, or the inevitable result of people not knowing their place. But once the truth about Sarah came out, Other truths followed. Families came forward with stories they'd been too afraid to tell. Witnesses emerged from decades of silence, and the full scope of the three families' crimes became clear. The legal system had done what it could. The murderers were dead or in prison, their wealth confiscated to pay reparations to the families of their victims. But justice, real justice, was more complicated than what could be handed down by a judge and jury. Real justice meant changing the system that had allowed men like Charles Whitmore to think they could take whatever they wanted from people they saw as less than human. Real justice meant making sure that no other Sarah Jenkins would die in silence, forgotten and unmourned. That's why I'd started the school. That's why I spent my days teaching children who looked like me that they had value, that they had rights, that their voices mattered. Because education was power, and power was the only thing that could protect them from the Charles Whitmores of the world. One of my students was a girl named Hope, about the same age Sarah had been when she died. Hope was smart and curious and brave, always asking questions that made the adults uncomfortable. She reminded me so much of what Sarah must have been like that it sometimes took my breath away. "Teacher Elior," Hope said one day after class, "why did those men kill Miss Sarah? Why didn't they just leave her alone?" It was a question I'd been asked many times by many different people. The simple answer was that they'd killed her because they could, because they'd been raised to believe that black lives didn't matter, that black women existed only for their pleasure and convenience. But the real answer was more complicated than that. They'd killed her because she'd threatened their sense of superiority, their belief that they were inherently better than people who looked like her. They'd killed her because she'd refused to accept their version of reality, where white men could do whatever they wanted without consequences. They killed her because they were afraid, I told Hope, afraid that if people knew what they'd done, they'd lose their power. Afraid that if Sarah got justice, other people might start demanding justice too. But they lost their power anyway, Hope pointed out. So they were afraid for nothing. "That's right," I said. "Fear makes people do terrible things, Hope. But courage like Sarah showed when she threatened to tell the truth, courage can change the world." As the months passed, I watched the effects of our work spread through the community. Former slaves who'd learned to read were teaching their neighbors. Children who'd never dreamed of an education were learning their letters and numbers. Slowly, carefully, we were building something new from the ashes of the old system. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and disappointments, moments when the weight of history seemed too heavy to bear. Some of my students gave up, discouraged by the hostility they faced from white folks who didn't want to see them succeed. Some of the families I tried to help were too afraid to accept assistance, too beaten down by years of oppression to believe that change was possible. But for every person who gave up, there was another who kept fighting. For every door that closed, another one opened. And slowly, gradually, I began to see the kind of change that Sarah's death had made possible. The most surprising change came from an unexpected source. Miss Catherine Beauregard. After her father's execution, she'd been left alone in the world, shunned by polite society, and struggling to survive on what little money she had left. Most folks expected her to leave town, to start over somewhere else, where nobody knew her story. Instead, she came to me. "I want to help," she said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of our makeshift schoolhouse. "I want to do something to make up for what my family did." "Anjay," I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or self-serving motives, but all I saw was genuine remorse and a desperate need to find some way to atone for her family's sins. "What kind of help?" I asked. "I can teach," she said. "I had the best education money could buy. I can teach reading, writing, mathematics, history, literature. I can teach these children things that will help them succeed in the world." It was a controversial decision. Many of the parents didn't want their children taught by a white woman, especially one whose family had been involved in Sarah's murder. But Catherine proved herself over time, working harder than anyone else, never complaining about the long hours or the hostility she faced from both black and white communities. She became one of our best teachers, and more than that, she became a symbol of the possibility of redemption. If Catherine Beauregard could change, if she could overcome the poison of her upbringing and dedicate her life to helping the people her family had oppressed, then maybe there was hope for real change in the South. Years passed. The school grew, adding new teachers and new students. Some of our graduates went on to start schools of their own in other towns. Others became preachers, doctors, lawyers, business owners. They carried Sarah's story with them wherever they went, making sure that her sacrifice was never forgotten. I never married, never had children of my own, but I had hundreds of students over the years, and each one of them was like a child to me. I watched them grow and learn and succeed, and I knew that Sarah would have been proud of what her death had made possible. On the 20th anniversary of the night I'd finally spoken, I returned to Sarah's grave one more time. The headstone was weathered now, the inscription worn smooth by wind and rain, but the memory of what had happened there was as sharp as ever. "Thank you," I whispered to the stone. "Thank you for giving me the courage to break my silence. Thank you for showing me that one voice, speaking the truth at the right moment, can change everything." And then, as I walked away from the cemetery, I thought about all the voices that had been silenced over the years, all the stories that had been buried with their tellers. But I also thought about all the voices that had been freed, all the stories that were finally being told. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished, but it was started, and that was enough. Sarah Jenkins had not died in vain, and her voice, speaking through mine and through all the others who'd found the courage to tell the truth, would echo through the generations. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain silent, watching and waiting for the right moment to speak. But when that moment comes, when justice hangs in the balance and truth is the only weapon you have, you better make sure your words count. Because in the end, that's all any of us really have. Our voices, our stories, our willingness to stand up and speak the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that's enough to change the world. Word count, 1,499. Epilogue, the echo of truth. 50 years have passed since that stormy night when I finally broke my silence, and I'm an old man now, my hair white as cotton and my hands gnarled with age. But my voice is still strong, and my memory is still clear, and there are still stories that need telling. I'm writing this down now because I won't be here much longer, and I want to make sure that Sarah's story and the lesson it teaches survives long after I'm gone. The young folks today, they don't always understand how things used to be, how dangerous it was to speak truth to power, how much courage it took for people like Sarah to stand up for themselves. The school we started in that old carriage house has grown into something I never could have imagined. We have 3 buildings now with more than 200 students and a dozen teachers. Some of our graduates have gone on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves, spreading education and opportunity throughout the South. Catherine Beauregard, or Miss Catherine as the students still call her, passed away 5 years ago, but not before she'd taught hundreds of children to read and write. She never married, never had a family of her own, but she found redemption in service to others. At her funeral, former students came from all over the country to pay their respects to the white woman who dedicated her life to making amends for her family's sins. The 3 plantations where the murders took place have been turned into something beautiful. The Whitmore Plantation is now a school for colored children, funded by money from Charles Whitmore's estate. The Beauregard Plantation has become a hospital, serving both black and white patients without discrimination, and the Ashford Plantation has been converted into a home for orphaned children, regardless of their race or background. It's fitting, I think, that places where so much evil was done have been transformed into sources of healing and hope. Sarah would have liked that, I believe. She always said that good could come from even the worst situations. if people had the courage to make it happen. The legal changes have been slower in coming, but they're coming nonetheless. Slavery is still legal in Mississippi, but there are more and more voices calling for its abolition. The story of Sarah Jenkins and the three families has become a rallying cry for abolitionists throughout the country. Proof that the system of slavery corrupts everyone it touches, black and white alike. I've been invited to speak at churches and meeting halls throughout the North, telling Sarah's story to audiences who hang on every word. It's strange, being famous for something I never wanted to be famous for. But if my voice can help bring about the end of slavery, if Sarah's story can help prevent other tragedies like hers, then I suppose it's worth the discomfort of being in the public eye. The most important change, though, has been in the hearts and minds of the people who heard the truth that night. Word spread quickly through the slave quarters and the free black communities, and suddenly people who'd been afraid to speak up found their voices. Stories that had been buried for decades came to light. Crimes that had been covered up were exposed. The conspiracy of silence that had protected men like Charles Whitmore began to crumble. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without cost. There were reprisals against people who spoke out, violence against those who demanded justice. But for every person who was silenced, two more found the courage to speak. The truth, once released, proved impossible to contain. I think often about the power of silence and the power of speech. For 17 years, my silence was my strength, allowing me to gather the information I needed to bring down Sarah's killers. But in the end, it was my voice, speaking at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, that made all the difference. There's a lesson in that for anyone who's ever felt powerless, anyone who's ever thought their voice doesn't matter. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is wait and watch and listen. But when the moment comes to speak, and you'll know when it comes, you have to be ready to use your voice with all the power and precision you can muster. The children I teach today live in a different world than the one I grew up in. They can speak freely, learn openly, dream of futures that would have been impossible for children like me 50 years ago. But they still need to understand the price that was paid for their freedom, the courage it took for people like Sarah to stand up for what was right. That's why I tell them Sarah's story, why I make sure they understand that their education, their opportunities, their very freedom to speak their minds, all of it was bought with blood and sacrifice and the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Remember Sarah Jenkins, I tell them. Remember that she was brave enough to demand justice, even when she knew it might cost her life. Remember that her voice, silenced by violence, still echoes through the generations. And remember that your voices, your stories, your truths, your willingness to speak up for what's right, they matter just as much as hers did. Some of the children ask me if I regret waiting so long to speak, if I wish I'd found a way to save Sarah's life instead of just avenging her death. It's a fair question, and one I've wrestled with for 50 years. The truth is, I was just a child when Sarah was murdered. Even if I'd been able to speak, even if I'd tried to warn her or stop what was happening, I probably would have just become another victim. The system was too powerful, the conspiracy too deep, the men involved too dangerous. But by waiting, by watching, by gathering the evidence I needed and choosing exactly the right moment to reveal it, I was able to do something more than just save one life. I was able to expose the entire rotten system, to bring down not just Sarah's killers, but the network of violence and intimidation that had protected them for 20 years. Sometimes justice requires patience. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait for the perfect moment to strike. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, you can turn your silence into a weapon that's more devastating than any gun or sword. As I write these final words, I can hear the voices of children in the schoolyard outside my window, laughing and playing and learning. They're the real legacy of Sarah Jenkins, the living proof that her death was not in vain. They're the future she died for, the hope she never got to see realized. And somewhere, in whatever place the spirits of the righteous go when their earthly work is done, I believe Sarah Jenkins is smiling. Because her voice, the voice that was silenced by violence and hatred, lives on in every child who learns to read, every person who finds the courage to speak truth to power, every soul who refuses to let injustice go unchallenged. The echo of truth, once released, never truly dies. It just keeps growing stronger, generation after generation, until it becomes a roar that can shake the very foundations of the world. That's Sarah's real legacy. That's the gift she gave us all. And that's why, even 50 years later, I'm still telling her story. Because some voices are too important to let fade away. This concludes the complete mini-series, The Silent Boy Who Spoke Only Once. What he said destroyed 3 families. A story of justice, courage, and the power of speaking truth at exactly the right moment.